So my name is Vinnie. Been out in Singapore for about 4 years, moved out from San Francisco. Pretty familiar with the concept of failure, both personally going through some companies I've shut down and also some companies I've worked with. So today we're going to talk about the other F word. Just wanted to start off with a funny little story. So this is me in Pune, India. Me and my wife, we did a rickshaw race across the western side of India over 2 weeks. So tens of thousands of kilometers, driving 200 kilometers a day. How many people have been in a tuk-tuk? Okay, so you can imagine driving it 200 kilometers a day. It's going to break down pretty frequently. So it was a race. We were raising money for charity, but it's still a race. We're trying to get to the finish line. This was our worst breakdown. We actually got stuck for 2 days. And so at the time, it was really stressful. This was a very nice other tuk-tuk taxi driver that pulled over to help us. Ended up something in the engine that was broken. It took literally just 2 days to figure it out and get it fixed. So that had us lose the race. We ended up winning the Bonkers Award just for at least some of the antics that we had. But at the time, it was stressful. It was not a happy feeling. But in hindsight, it's actually one of the memories of being stuck in this city, what we went through, people that we met, are some of the fondest memories we have. So in hindsight, it's not a failure at all. So a little bit of my background. So I started at IBM right out of college, worked there for a few years, realized that wasn't for me. Had the same sort of dream that everybody else does of moving out to the Bay Area. So moved out to San Francisco, but because I had no job, didn't know what I was gonna do, lived in basically a dirty hostel that had a bathroom down the hallway, and I was doing that for a few weeks. And then I met a friend who had just moved out from Chicago, and they were about to launch a product called Metro, which is the shirt I'm wearing. And for me, it was like an amazing fit. They had housing. It was like 3 or 4 guys that just moved into a 3-bedroom in Palo Alto, so I could move out of one bunk bed into another. And it was a startup that was pretty cool and fun to work on. So joined Metro. Within that year of 2005, we ended up raising some funding. That's one of our angel investors on the right, kind of hard to see. And so everything was going really good. We're building it out. And Metro was an application that you would see people nearby and then could strike up a conversation with them. So think of like Tinder, but less about casual hookups and just more of like actually talking to people. However, I think timing is a really important part of success, and we were too early to the market. This was before the iPhone existed. It was before Android. So that concept, it was just way too early. I think if we would have launched it a few years after, we would have been in a much better timing. So we basically went to this position of we raised some funding. We had some great spikes in traffic in certain cities like San Francisco and Chicago, but we ended up shutting down the service in 2007 and got in TechCrunch Deadpool. And that felt like shit going through that. And I remember that time just both for our investors, hey, we have to tell them that we're shutting down this company. For the hundreds of thousands of users that we had that were active on the platform, hey, we're shutting it down. It really felt like crap. So then take two. Basically, the core of us from Metro said, all right, let's try this again. Let's build a new company, new service. And so we wanted to do forums. It was still in the communication space. We thought forums hadn't been updated in a while. Forums predate the web. So we spent 6 months building a forum product, and being kind of we're Silicon Valley engineers, we're a hot team, we know what's best for the market. We spent 6 months siloed off building this product without any sort of customer feedback. Once we put it out into the market, we basically invited admins running very large forums to check out our software and give us feedback. They all said it was shit. And so then that was kind of a second failure for us of, crap, we thought we knew what the market wanted and it didn't. So this was before Eric Ries coined the term lean, but basically we didn't do customer development. We didn't get out of the building. So we went back to the drawing board, And this time we did then start doing a bunch of user testing, actually, which came from 4 Steps of Epiphany, which was the professor that Eric Ries kind of worked pretty closely with. So we did a bunch of user testing, literally put ads on Craigslist of, hey, we're a startup, we'll give you free pizza and beer if you come in and spend 45 minutes using our software. So through that, and then inviting admins online to use our software, we were basically able to build a very core forum, which was basically post a question and people can post replies. And we didn't put in all the extra bells and whistles. There was no avatars, there was no private messaging, no search, filtering, but we had this really core product and we put that out, and then we just started iterating on that and building upon it. And step by step, we built what is Lauria, the forum hosting platform that was acquired by CrowdGather a few years later. And that was in 2010, which allowed me to basically, it wasn't a huge acquisition, but it was enough to take a little time off, how I ended up here. And so my wife and I, before that trip to India, were backpacking around Asia. So we're all familiar with failure. We've all played sports, we've played video games. The concept of losing is not unfamiliar with us. What I think is different is, here you just put another quarter in and you play again, but you realize that you get better every time you're practicing. So I just wanted to walk through, there's a lot of ways that people can fail, but what are some of the ways I've seen people fail? You guys might be, how many people are familiar with Bubbly here? So Bubbly is a Sequoia-backed company. Basically, they've gone through a few iterations. What they've looked like for the past 2 years is Twitter for voice. So if you don't have a smartphone, you can leave short messages to your friends and people can follow you. They're currently going under a liquidation. So the company is being dissolved. They're based here in Singapore. However, that doesn't necessarily need to be failure. For me, it's about perspective. So The Onion is a satirical paper in the US, and yeah, I love this. It was right after Germany won the World Cup, and they're like, Germany feels failure because they won it behind schedule. And to me, that's about perspective, and that's really what failure is. So going back to Bubbly, I think in 3 years, what the management team, what a lot of the team who have left this to go on to do something else, in hindsight, it'll look like that was just one step on a road to success. I know Thomas Clayton, the CEO, obviously it's been a stressful time. There's been a lot that they've been going through to kind of not have to liquidate the company, but that was the ultimate decision. And I think in a few years, it's not gonna look like a failure. So how does one fail? Many different ways. I think the number one thing, and I'm very guilty about this, is prioritizing. We have so many things going on, whether that's work or personal, and then really choosing what is that urgent, highest priority, and then everything else that's just kind of a waste of time. And it's really, really difficult, and that's something I still strive with of, there's so many things you want to do, but what is the core thing? One little life hack that I've kind of picked up just from reading is, to help with this, is don't check your emails in the morning and give yourself like an hour in the morning just to plan out what you actually want to do. If you have that conscious of what are my highest priorities and you don't allow somebody else to control it, you'll have a better chance of actually completing them. The other is trying to do too many things at once, trying to go too many directions. So now in my role as an investor, venture capitalist, I'm constantly meeting with startups, investing in startups. The number one thing I see with startups that we probably don't, one of the reasons we don't end up investing in them is they're trying to do too much. They're trying to do 10 different things. I want to take a high risk of somebody doing just one thing really, really well. I think when you try to do a lot of different things, you end up not taking any steps forward. You're kind of just bouncing around in all these different directions. So if you're building a company and there's 5 different options that you could do, my advice would be pick one, give it 110%, and if that doesn't work out, then go to option 2. But don't try to do 20% of 5 different things and see what works out. Another way of failing is not accepting, not progressing, not accepting change. So I think a great example of this would be like the newspaper industry. Some newspapers have actually understood, all right, this is a new medium, a new world, how do we act in it? And some haven't. And so I think it's really important that you need to always be progressive, always looking out for change. By a show of hands, how many people here are Mac users? Okay, almost everyone, but that means the rest of you are Windows users. The one thing I always look at, so somebody probably a decade ago switched from Windows to Mac that I look at as being different, is that Apple constantly breaks things in order to move things forward. Especially with the iPhone, all the developers have to make the app work on the newest OS. They're constantly breaking it to be progressive and move things forward. Microsoft, on the other hand, because there's so many businesses using it and there's a bottom dollar, they support a lot of legacy stuff in their software, and sometimes they'll support it for a decade. And that's a long time in the computer age. And so I think that's sort of, just saying we need to change something, we need to rip something off, we need to just move it forward, I think is really important to be successful. Just going back to my example with Lauria, again, in order for us to be successful, we took this very iterative approach of building out features, but we'd also track the usage of features. And basically the way we were building it is when people complained loud enough that they wanted something, then we would build it in. But then we would track, are people using it? If we saw that people weren't, we would actually take the feature out. And this would get a few complaints, but ultimately, and this was really our CTO's decision, it was less code to maintain. And it was easier for us as a startup to be more nimble, to add more features if we had less to maintain. And I think that's important for success. Another way people fail is perfection. And this is not just you personally trying to be perfect, but for your company, trying to make everything 110%. The reality is you can't get there. And so you need to make sacrifices. And again, just personal stories with Lauria, that first product we put out that everybody said sucked, to me as the product manager, I thought it was a good looking product. It had a lot of features that we liked. What we ended up putting out then, 6 months later, was something I would say was only 10% of a good product. But the market reacted much better to that, and then we iterated on top of that. So I think if you're doing anything internet world based, being less than perfect is actually a good thing, as long as you're quickly and rapidly building on top of that and making changes and fixing bugs. I think even in the creative industry, you have to make sacrifices in terms of perfection and time. And so if it's creative mixed with the business world, it's never going to be where you want it. And so to be able to allow something to go out a little bit less than that, I think is really important to be successful. Another way that I've seen people fail is by setting too many goals. I've never been the type of person to set like my 5-year, 10-year sort of life plan. I don't think I would be where I am today if I did that. The reason why is because I'm constantly changing what I want to do. There's different scenarios that are happening, different things that seem attractive to me. If I was to set my goal or a whole set of goals that need to happen over the next few years, when a new opportunity presents itself that doesn't align itself with those goals, I would just automatically turn it away. Now, if you're running a business, you do need metrics. You do need, revenue is a goal, growth. I mean, there are certain key things that you definitely want to be tracking. So I'm not saying don't have any goals. I'm just saying don't set yourself up to have so many goals or too long of a plan, like 5 to 10 years out, because things are going to change, and then you'll feel like failure. You failed to achieve a goal if you take a different opportunity that's actually successful. Risk avoidance. So to me, risk and failure tied so closely together. Being a little too scared to step into something. For a lot of people, this is a mix of people from somewhere else, from Singapore. You've already taken a very big risk. You've transplanted yourself to a different part of the world. That's actually, to me, a really, really good thing. I definitely have met a few companies. There's a concept in the Valley of a soft landing. So going back to Bubbly, this idea of rather than completely liquidating a company, can a company be acquired for a small amount of money, but then the team, it's kind of like an acqui-hire, goes to another company. Google's famous for this, for acquiring a company for like $10 to $20. 10 to 20 million, which seems like a lot, but for some companies that have raised like 10 million, that's not necessarily like a win for them. But Google does that a lot. And so I've met 3 companies here that I've tried to basically set up that sort of soft landing for them that they've passed on. And to me, that's kind of this fear of what does that mean, or I'm not really sure if I want that. And in one of the cases, so they passed on it, and then a few months later, they actually had to wind up the company. And then that same sort of soft landing did happen where they were acquired by another startup, but they lost all the story of it. if they would have made the decision a little bit earlier, they could have made a really great PR story of the company was acquired, this is why it's acquired, this is how it fits in with the strategy, but they had to do it after actually winding down and shutting down the company, so they lost that ability to have a good story out of it. I think another thing that people set themselves up for failure is thinking through every decision. There's a lot of options that we always have, but if you end up thinking too deeply through it and spending too much time, that can lead to basically indecision, where you're not making the right decision, you're not taking any steps forward. Somebody, it might have been a mentor, once said to me, and this always stuck out, that if there's a decision in your life, whether it's work or personal, and there's 2 or 3 choices, and you're really, really grappling over which choice to make, and it's something that you're lamenting over days, maybe even weeks, it probably doesn't matter. Basically, if there's enough pros and cons that they're constantly balancing each other out, it probably doesn't matter which one you'll be fine. And so there's that idea of don't spend too much time figuring out what to do. Sometimes it's just best just to take that step forward and put yourself out there and then run with whatever happens. There's also the fear of failure. So this is, again, what would prevent somebody from moving somewhere like Silicon Valley, Hollywood. The amount of people that move to these places from other places, from another part of the world is very, very high. By its default, they've kind of gotten past the fear of failure. But I would say putting yourself someplace new, whether it's a new geography, a new job, new community, something new, that can help get yourself over a fear of failure. How many people have seen this video? It's my favorite video on the internet. So she's just search McDonald's freakout, and you'll laugh for about 3 minutes. But basically, I think another way people fail, and not necessarily in this context, is by getting too overly emotional. And so if you're in a business, emotion, that's great, that's what drives it and, as a person and pushes it forward. But sometimes you have to really separate yourself from your personal emotions. So it could be you got angry at a partner, at a coworker, at a customer, but sometimes you really have to remove yourself in order to not let that screw up the business. And that's a really difficult thing to do. Different things that I think help kind of separate some of that emotion. Like, I'm a big fan of meditation and yoga. For some people, it's running. Things I like to do when I'm coming into work, I actually like to listen to a funny podcast or watch a funny video. And it kind of helps, make sure that my day is getting started on more of a positive note, and so that there's no stress that's going to just make it start, on a negative note from day one. So I think being able to sometimes say, I'm getting a little too emotional with this, customer, step back, maybe handing it off to somebody else can be helpful. Another way people fail is by not using data. So if you have an internet company, there's all these free tools or Flurry for mobile apps even if it's an ad agency, for tracking social behavior, social media performance, there's all these free tools that a lot of people don't take advantage of. And so, sometimes people will take from the concept of lean startups of talking to customers, talking to people. But the one thing I think that they miss there is then on the other half is actually watching behaviors. So when you talk to somebody, they'll tell you, I want X or I don't like Y. But that's what they consciously think. The reality is when you actually watch some of the data, how they perform, how they use a service, sometimes you actually see it be different than what they consciously say. So you need to mix what people say with how they actually behave. So this is really, really important to be trying to track whatever it is that you're doing. So some good examples of this. Facebook versus MySpace. So back in probably 2006, 2007, Facebook and MySpace were still pretty different, but they had a lot of similarities. And the big similarity to me was that on MySpace, you would have to go to people's pages to leave comments, see notifications, see what photos you added. And you literally would go to your friend's page sometimes multiple times a day or multiple times a week, even though there was no changes. It was around 2007, 2008 that Facebook came out with the wall. And that was basically by watching behaviors, using data, using stats, and seeing that, hey, people are going to check pages that aren't changing. Is there a different way we could present this information so it's a more positive experience for them? And I think that's really when Facebook took off compared to MySpace. I mean, there are a million other reasons, but this one behavior thing alone, I think MySpace missed it. They weren't really paying attention to behaviors and what people are doing and how to improve it. And so Facebook made that a much more enjoyable experience. But I remember when this came out, especially in the Valley, like TechCrunch, all the blogs said how bad it was. This wall sucks. I just want to, view it as the normal profiles. But in reality, this is what has made it so sticky, and what people spend, 20 minutes a day going through is your wall. What are all the updates? So here are some other kind of failures that have turned into successes. So we're all familiar with Groupon, but Groupon actually started out as The Point, which was a social enterprise, and it was basically to help causes raise money or get volunteers, basically bring a community together around a cause. He raised money on that, was building it out for about 1.5 years, wasn't getting a lot of success, but basically wrapped that same idea of getting a whole bunch of people together and then applied it to discounts, to buying, flash buying, and group buying, and did very, very well. Another example is PayPal. PayPal actually started out with these old school Palm Pilot PDAs. It was, you can beam money wirelessly with the IR device, and that's how it started out. And then the reality is, that wasn't very popular. Getting adoption was difficult. So they kind of switched to all right, pay via email. This is for eBay transactions. And that's where their success came out. So what they actually wanted to start was, you're at a restaurant and you're going to split the bill. I'm going to beam, $20 to you. That didn't work out. But where they did find a fit was with eBay and online commerce. And what I think is so cute/ironic is they've now gone full circle and they're back to mobile in terms of swipe your credit card for a merchant to accept a payment. But the whole idea is that what things start out at usually don't look like what they finalize at, but we always forget how things started, just like with The Point before this. We forget that that was what something originally looked like. To me, failure and risk are one for one. I'm in a business, so venture capital, I'm looking for high risks. I want to invest in somebody taking high risks. So for me, I have a high tolerance for failure. I know that 1/3 of the companies we invest in are going to fail. They're not going to exist 5 years out from now. But that doesn't stop me. That's kind of exciting. I don't want any of them to kind of fail in a terrible explosion. Would always want that soft landing for them. But the reality is, failure is a part of life. I'm in an industry that really, really has a very high failure rate. But for me, that's fun, that's exciting, and that means people are taking a lot of risk. So I just wanted to leave you guys with, go out, take some risks, take those jumps, and from personal experience, every jump I've taken going into something unknown has opened up a wonderful opportunity that I could not have expected. So I just want to encourage that. Take that jump, and you'll be fine. The net will appear. Thank you.
So we'll proceed to the question and answer segment. Does anyone have a question from the floor? All right, sir, would you like to speak up?
Randomly, as a VC,
Yeah.
At what point do people approach you or you approach them? I mean, do you take an idea off a sheet of paper, or do you wait for a prototype, or do you, at what point are you interested?
Good question. So it's kind of what point, and so that's different for every investor. What point am I interested, or is our firm interested in investing in companies? For us, we want to see a prototype built and traction, some stats. And that's the whole idea is, I can think I'm smart and say this is going to work and this isn't going to work, but the reality is there's a lot more variables than that. So just by building a prototype and having some traction, it shows me a few things. Are you a team that can actually work together and create something? Because 9 out of 10 times that's really, really difficult. A lot of failure is actually communication. I should have put that out there. Teams not working well together. So can you build something together, get it out there, and get people using it? And then what I'm looking for is what are the behaviors? I don't need to see millions of people. Sometimes we make investments with, it's in the thousands of users, but we can see what the behavior is, how long somebody's in the app, how often they're coming back, and that gives an idea of where they're at. But that's our personal view. Some people will invest at that kind of idea stage, but again, from somebody who's gone through it, the reality is what you have an idea on versus what you end up building over 2 years is going to be completely different. Yep.
Have you seen a different appetite for failure in Singapore versus in Silicon Valley? Can you talk about that dynamic of the kiosks?
Okay, so the question is a different appetite for failure in Singapore from Silicon Valley. So that's actually a question I get a lot from the government here, especially when we're investing. This is how I actually look at it. What we're looking for are risk takers. Risk takers usually displace themselves. Silicon Valley, half of Silicon Valley is not from Silicon Valley. So the risk takers here in Singapore usually end up going somewhere else. They may go to the Valley, they may go to London, Australia, somewhere else. So from that sense, I don't look at it so much as a kind of cultural country thing. I just look at it as Singapore being a small island that in order to take risks, you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to, move away from people that would tell you, don't do that, that's stupid, you're not gonna be successful, which might be your parents, it might be your friends. I've had that when I quit IBM, my mom did not want me doing that. My parents were the first ones I spoke to when I was thinking about quitting. My mom did not want it. My dad, who has his own business, was like, yeah, totally, go do whatever you want. But I think it was, moving away. So for me, it was New York, moving out of New York, putting myself someplace completely new where you have to basically fight just to survive, that allows somebody to be successful. So I look at the same thing for Singapore, that if you grew up here and you're living here, you have no way to put yourself in a really difficult position. You're always kind of close to home, and the way you do that is probably by going somewhere else. Yep.
I have a comment and also a question.
Sure.
I think it looks like there's a pattern into success to have failure, some sort of failures. From the big successes you've been witnessing, it looks like they've all been through that. So what do you think that could be folded into the whole plan initially?
So could you make a plan of failure in order to have success? That's an interesting question. And I kind of think so in terms of just like a video game, you need practice. And so if you go into something knowing that I am going to fail, but that's just one of 100 steps, I actually think it's a really, really positive thing. So I don't think you can plan how you will fail, but I do think it is actually positive going into something knowing I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to learn from that, pick myself up, and be stronger for it. The other part of it is I love to look at entrepreneurs as ignorantly optimistic. Like they don't know what to be scared of. As somebody who's for me, moving to Singapore, setting up a fund, in hindsight, knowing all the hiccups I had along the road and how difficult things were, if I knew all of that, I would not have done it. But because I went into it blindly, without, I had never set up a fund before, I didn't know what the hurdles were, but I was optimistic about that I could do it. I think was very, very helpful. So I think if you understand that there's going to be pain points, and then you don't spend too much time trying to scare yourself what all those pain points are, just accept you're gonna learn as you go. I think that is helpful for success. Good question. Don't be scared. Okay.
How important do you think it is as a maker, somebody who makes things, as a creative who makes things, to fail?
To me, if you're a creator, that's such a like a good question, but it's such a it can be such an opinion. Like think of all the great artists. Like a lot of them were not recognized in their time. So I don't know what their mindset was if they felt as a failure, but I think to realize that what you're working on may or may not be, if you're a creative, may or may not be recognized. For me, for an artist, they're basically ahead of their time. The reason they're not recognized, and so it could feel like a failure during their lifetime, is because they're ahead of their time. Like, to me, great art is basically people understanding culture, what's happening right now, in such a way that the normal person doesn't. And they express it in such a way that historically it makes sense and we can see it from the time. But for everybody else, it's very, very difficult to see at that time. So I think, yes, that's going to be part of it. And if you're truly passionate about something, and that's another thing we look, I mean, whether it's art or your business, we look for passionate people. If you're truly passionate about something and you're internally self-motivated, I think it helps kind of block out whether those are naysayers or people that don't understand.
If you're working on something and you're very sure that the prototype you have is not good enough, because whenever you try, like, do you still take it to people and try to learn, or do you work a bit more to try to get it to a stage where you think, well, it's probably not gonna work in the end, but here it is, I might try.
And do you take it to launch?
Yes, let's say to take it out to people and show them, who then afterwards might be like, oh, this is not going to work. And then when you go back, they go like, no, I tried you before, it doesn't work.
So good, yeah, like, could you take something out too early, people try it, and then they say it's crap, and then when you come back out, 6 months later, they're like, oh, I passed on you. I have definitely had that feeling now of going through the motions. What I've learned is people, when you're a small little brand company person, people are always forgiving. They're not going to write you off. I mean, if you're a big company, if you're Nike and you try some shoe, like, people may or may not be forgiving because you're a big brand. But if you're a small startup, people will generally forgive you. And the amount you'll learn by putting something out early and crappy, just to figure out what is it that people like and what people don't like, is huge. And then the other thing is, if you're a small startup, the globe is your audience. So even if you get 1,000 people that tried it and hate it, there's 99.9% of the rest of the world to go after. So yes, my thing would be just keep putting it out early, but get that feedback, see what people like and what people don't like, and that'll help steer you towards a successful outcome.
On making stuff, so if you had an idea and you thought about it about a year back, and you saw a few companies doing the same thing now months down the road, so would you still pursue the idea you had to make it a success, or just, well, you've done it?
So, good question. So if you have an idea and it's from like a year back and you see people doing it now, I think it's up to you. I think the best thing is just to pursue, just to take that jump. So if it is something that you're really passionate about, if you really, really, really are passionate about it and you're kind of kicking yourself, I didn't start it, then I would say, yeah, just start it, and you may find out your niche. Like, the reality is competition exists, but people will go for a different audience or behave a different way. That just put it out there and figure out what your niche is, if it's something you're passionate about. If it's something that you thought of and there's a clear winner that's out there right now, then I would figure out what your niche is before you even start. So for example, there's a startup I'm mentoring that they're basically working on a service that has a huge competitor in the Valley that just got like 40 or 50 million of funding from Sequoia. So it's kind of like a game over for them to do anything in the US at this point. So I said, well, why don't you try to, they're based here in Singapore, they were trying to do a global audience. Why don't you try to shift it and make it more flavored for this region, for Asia? And so it doesn't, you've been working on it. It's not that you're copying them. You're just now going to kind of change the way it feels, what it does, and that's your niche. And Asia's not even that small. So I would say if there's already a huge player, then I would start to think, well, what are they missing, or what are they not going after that I can go after? But I think the most important thing is just to take that jump. Yeah, if you didn't choose to take it a year ago, was it because you were a little scared, you weren't sure if the market would validate something? That, just try to convince yourself, take that first step, and more opportunity will present itself. Yeah.
I just wanted to add a point to the question before regarding how often, how soon you can publish a release, a new version. I work in open source software,
Okay.
and we have the notion of release early,
Yep.
release often.
Yep.
And that's a very good mechanism to identify if you have actually traction, adoption, and we also use Google Analytics to see the behavior, and we collect lots of data, and we do lots of evangelization around it, of course. And I think it's a very good way to, I mean, as you said before, when it's a small project, it's much easier, it's more forgiving. So I think it's a very good mechanism. I would recommend that.
And yeah, so I double that. So open source software, the concept of release early, release often is imbibed, and I fully echo and think, yeah, companies should be doing that. And also that's a great way of anybody thinking about doing something or being a little scared to take a dab. There's a whole movement of software for the past 20 years that you can participate in, whether it's on the design side, whether it's on the programming side, whether it's on the marketing side, communication, all these different things. That can also be a great way for anybody that's hasn't sure what to jump into to get an experience working on a much, much bigger project. That's always, the number of open source software that's out there is probably in the millions, and there's a lot that are really popular in figuring out what you want to be a part of. Cool.
Thank you, Vinnie. Let's put our hands together for Vinnie once again.